Hey everybody, Kyle here. About 5 months ago I moved into a new apartment and it came with a lot of furniture except it was missing a coffee table, so we built one out of a scrap chunk of wood and 2 milk crates. However, after about 5 months living with that, I decided it wasn't quite nice enough furniture for me, so I sketched up a nice fancy design for a do-it-yourself coffee table. So I purchased 11, I believe it was cedar 2x4s, non-pressure treated. It was a very difficult hike to move it that 1.5 kilometers using nothing but a little push cart, and I was quite exhausted. So I sketched up a cut list and then used these power tools to cut the wood up and make my table. There it is, a Kia style, some assembly required. To stain it and give it that rustic look, I didn't want to use a conventional wood stain because it gives it a very nice sort of look, so I wanted to go for a do-it-yourself thing to kind of rust it up a bit using a combination of salt, vinegar, and steel wool. Combine the salt and vinegar in a jar and then add the steel wool, and then you wait for it to dissolve. And you know it's ready because it starts looking like that. Now this dye, it actually interacts with the tannins in the wood, so to make sure there was enough, I poured a layer of red hot black tea on the wood first and let it dry. While I was waiting for that to happen, I started doing pilot holes. Now I find when you're screwing things together, it becomes a three-hand situation, so I just pre-drill everything and sort of start my screws off. Before I start driving screws in, I like to confirm that they're the right length. These are sort of the legs for the table. Now this is the part that I was a little bit concerned about. I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work. I built a jig and it worked flawlessly. It was incredibly easy. So I was really happy about this, that the only part of the table that I was unsure of how I was going to assemble became very easy. The tea is dry, so I can start putting the stain on. And as you can see, the stain actually goes on rather clear at first. It's really not that dark. Now while that's drying, I'm going to start assembling the rest of the table by putting on these side rails. And at this point, it became a lot more sturdy. I was a lot more confident in this project being a success once I felt with these rails on. I looked to the side and was quite surprised by how dark the tabletop had gotten. That was cool. So now back to building the table. The underboards, they were going to be left with the rustic natural look as well, so I started staining them, but this time I didn't bother pre-staining it with the tea because I wanted to see how much of a difference it actually made. You can see this dye changes color significantly over time as it dries. The one on the left or the top is the dry one. Those boards on the bottom are wet. It's a remarkable color change over time with this stain. Made a minor mistake, didn't measure correctly, so I had to modify the plan last minute. Luckily the glue wasn't dry yet, so I was still able to do this. It took away from the strength pretty significantly, but that's nothing a few extra crossbars can't solve. Typically when I'm building something, I don't like to mark things with marker because I find no matter how many coats of paint you put on top of it, that ink will always work its way forward and after a couple years will start showing. But since this is on the bottom and it's going to be dyed a dark color and it's going to be painted, I don't really care for this part. If it's going to be showing, never use a marker. So here it is with my modified design. The tabletop is now long enough and it all fits, so it's just screwing it in. But first you got to make sure those boards are level. Again, you don't have to measure, just find something like a scrap with a straight edge and butt them up against it, and there you go, they line up. Assemble it, glue it, screw it in. There's my table. It's very stable, very structural. However, I'm not quite happy with the stain because you can see a lot of the flaws and a few patches that I missed and all that kind of stuff. So also, the stain totally reacts with your skin as well as the wood. So for about a week after this, my hands were dyed brown. I wanted more variety in the tabletop because it ended up being a very flat color, so I thought I'd give it a nice sanding job. Of course, when you're sanding, there's dust. Safety third, wear a mask. After sanding the table down, there were some nice peaks and highlights, so it would give it a little more variety to the wood, but I wanted it even darker after this, so I gave it another coat of stain, but much to my surprise, rather than becoming darker, the second coat of stain actually lightened it almost to that fresh color. But this time when it dried, instead of drying a very flat, even red, almost purpley red-brown color, it went more greeny gray color, which was very surprising and much more of what I was after. So I was really happy to see this. I wanted to contrast the rustic fake reclaimed wood look with something that looked a little nicer, so I thought I'd painted a nice pristine white color for the legs and the support structures. So that's my table, and I was quite happy with how it looked at this point. However, I discovered that the dye I made, even though it was mostly dry, reacted with the paint, so I had to let it dry thoroughly, sand it all off, and repaint the base. But once that was done, I had a table that I was really happy with how it turned out. Of course, the major problem is that wood is totally unsealed and moisture will reactivate the stain. Now it's time to seal this. I went with the polyurethane. Of course, when you're putting on polyurethane, you'll want gloves, but don't use vinyl gloves. They're crap. They break every time, and polyurethane sucks to wash off your hands. Use nitrile. No, you know what? Skip out on nitrile. Use the good nitrile, the Gorilla Gloves. I've never had them fail on me. I didn't take a lot of process shots at this part because it was a lot of varnish, sand, varnish, sand, varnish, sand. It's not going to show on screen, but eventually I declared the table finished, and I brought it into my new apartment and set it in, and it fit perfectly, and I think it suits the apartment and just works with the area very nicely. So I'm quite proud of myself for this nice rustic table. If you've ever built yourself a rustic 2x4 table, let me know. If you've ever messed around with do-it-yourself dies or antiquing or anything like that, please let me know. Show me what you've done. I'd love to see it, and I'd love to try out some more do-it-yourself dies, because I don't know, it's nice doing things in a way that is easy, but other people don't know, so they think you're brilliant. So I want more of those tricks. So please show me yours. All right. Have a good evening. Bye.